Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is returning guest, the Black Horse. He's a Canadian professional, and in his spare time, he writes around Canadian history and its present socioeconomic status as a world player. In this conversation, we get into the impact that Trump's tariffs are having on Canada, both its left-wing and right-wing parties, and what that portends for Canada's future as a nation state, if indeed it is a nation state and not, as the Trudeau administration opined, a post-nation state. You can find Black Horse's work down there in the description. He's an excellent guest. Love talking to him, always very enriching. Without further ado, here is the Black Horse. You guys are in lockdown again, I hear.
Not in this province, in on the East Coast. So the premier of, I think it's Nova Scotia, has decided that the only solution to the wildfire problem is to ban people from all activities that involve going into the woods. So according to him, there's absolutely no excuse to go onto the woods on your property, on someone else's property, on public
Oh,
property,
even your own property.
even your own property. You can't go hiking, you can't go fishing, you can't camp, none of these things. And I guess this is so Canada has had an escalating problem over the last couple of years with well, I don't want to misattribute, but with likely climate activists setting wildfires as part of kind of narrative control warfare.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this is connected to the fact that we have a giant tinderbox in large areas of the country, because as the pulp and paper industry has declined, a lot of the forest management that those companies once did by periodic clear cutting for pulp and paper has kind of disappeared, and a lot of crown land has passed into the forest management of the provincial authorities.
Mm-hmm.
And the provincial authorities basically don't manage those forests, uh, which means they return to their natural burn cycle, which is fine if you accept that you're then going to have periodic, very widespread wildfires.
Yeah, yeah.
So, um,
But it's easier to just use it as an excuse to further demoralize the population. Or maybe
yeah,
people are okay with that. Or Nova Scotians generally
uh, being being
sympathetico?
being
Simpatico?
outdoors in the summer is like the whole reason you live in Nova Scotia.
Right.
About a huge fraction of the population down there are retirees, and
Hmm.
there are some active industries down there. I don't want to kind of belittle that, but uh, the outdoor experience and the kind of East Coast lifestyle is a big part of what attracts people to live down there, and this is really putting a crimp in that. So I don't know. I don't know enough about local East Coast politics to really know whether anything will happen to change it, but
Yeah.
I just find it, a- as an outdoorsman, I just find it viscerally offensive that there's like going out and hiking. That might be the single healthiest hobby you could possibly have, and we're gonna ban it because
Hmm.
forest fires. Like,
Well, at least you guys have a stellar public sector health service
yeah,
that will, take up the
it will
health
solve your
effects.
problem one way or the other. Have you tried killing yourself? Did that
Yeah.
make it feel better?
Well, it opens up a question just how much wiggle room these different provinces have within the Canadian Federation. And if there's anything similarly in a right is the wrong way to put it, but something that's a little bit more not left, like a direction that maybe Alberta's taking.
Well, the power and authority of the Canadian federal government has declined a lot over the past really 30 years. So originally Canada was set up with a very federal structure where provinces had a greater share of sovereignty even than U.S. states at in 1776. Part of that is because at the time Canada had no wasn't in charge of its own military, so the central government had fundamentally no function other than building railroads.
Hmm.
As the powers as powers well as Canada drifted away from the British Empire, and there's a whole history that goes with that, the federal government got into its hands a lot more power. The kind of watershed moment for this is the First World War, when the income tax was introduced, and Canada became went from a nation without really a standing army to one of the most militarized nations ever to exist
Really?
for a period of time. Something like 60% of government spending for the years of the war was on was military spending, and
That's a whole
that
lot of
include
Mounties, man.
yeah. While Canada participated in the First World War in a really significant way, but this because you went from the First World War to the Depression and then into the Second World War, uh, and then into the into the early progressive era after the war. There's like this 40-year period where the Canadian government spends between like 10% and 30% of GDP on its military, like Soviet
Mhm.
Union levels of military spending for the
Hmm.
period.
Did they
Peak
receive anything back for that, like sovereignty or resources from all of their exploits, their military exploits, or?
Well, the consequence of the British Empire being the losers of the First and Second World War were that sovereignty in from Canada passed from being the colonial possession of the British Empire to being the colonial possession of the United States.
Hmm.
And it was hard to understand that that would be the consequence at the time, but that's how it ultimately kind of panned out. The other consequence of this is that Canada went from a highly decentralized structure to a highly centralized structure.
Hmm.
The income tax financed a federal government, and then during the era of the welfare of the construction of the welfare state, the federal government took responsibilities like healthcare and education, which were delineated to the province in the provinces in the structure, and said, "Fine, you're in charge of it, but you better do it the way we want you to it. Otherwise, giving you we'll stop giving you transfer payments to pay for it." Because what happened was the federal government centralized most of the tax collection and then paid out to the provinces in order to pay for all these social services.
Hmm.
So the provinces maintained a high degree of nominal authority, but because they were all dependent on federal dollars in order to do anything, you got a very strong soft power relationship between the federal government and the provincial governments.
Hmm.
That all that arrangement created a very centralized Canada between maybe peaking in the 50s and then continuing all the way to the early 90s. In the early 90s, the Canadian federal government experienced a soft bankruptcy.
Hmm.
And because it experienced a soft bankruptcy, it had to radically cut all of these transfer payments that went down to the provinces. There have been a number of consequences to this. One of the consequences has been the decline in the relative power of the federal government compared to the provincial governments. And so you have, in the years following this, you have the Quebec separatism referendum. You have things like the Alberta Sovereignty Act, which is a document declaring the Alberta government's intention to nullify federal law in areas that it believes that it's unreasonable.
When was that produced?
2023 or 2024.
Okay, so this is where we're at now.
Yeah, right now we're in. First of all, Canada's central government is spinning towards a second soft bankruptcy, and because of what happened, well, because of the way Canada's elites fractured first during the period of Trudeau the Elder, and then that tension was badly inflamed by the mismanagement of Trudeau the Younger. You have this situation where the Western provinces are attempting a kind of soft separation,
Hmm.
and the political formula that kind of keeps Canada together requires taking their money and delivering it to Quebec in order to cool Quebec separatism. So this whole system is breaking down, and you
Yeah.
can
What
see
does
why I'm.
Quebec give anybody other than bureaucracy, right? That's their main
Uh,
export.
I mean,
Maybe finances a little bit.
they give them the power and glory of being the federal government of Canada. I don't know,
Oh,
like
okay. But then you
so
have
it.
BC, which is hard left again, right? Just that kind of mirrors what's happening on the far east of Canada.
Well,
So when you
BC
say the western
is.
states, you're
Well, what
usually
I
talking you're
say is
talking about the
really
central.
the is everything east of the Rockies and west of Lake Superior. Well,
Okay.
even maybe west of Lake Huron is that way. And then, as you point out, the BC coast is like its own thing. I'm not even sure if left is quite the right way to describe it. It's
Hmm.
you know how like Portland and LA have this quality of magical realism to them, where the nothing about those places make any sense, but there's millions and millions of people there, and they all somehow get paid, and they all somehow go shopping and whatever.
Hmm.
The coast of BC has this similar quality where there's very little industry there. There's very little productive activity going on, and yet it's got one of the most important ports in Canada sits there, and somehow, and there's this strange situation where members of the Chinese Communist Party park their fortunes in Vancouver real estate, and so have transferred an enormous amount of wealth to the domestic population there, in
Hmm.
order to live at levels of luxury that otherwise don't make any sense in the context.
Hmm. Yeah.
So you have one of I compare it to Portland for this reason, because it's a system that is very obviously unsustainable if you think about it for more than 5 minutes, but it continues to operate.
Hmm.
And we're kind of living in this moment where you can kind of see the crash ahead of you,
Yeah. Well,
but
it
it's not
seems
here
like
yet.
it's bolstered by foreign activity, whether it's the United States, it's immigration, the mass immigration intake of what the subcontinental Asians, and then its relationship with Chinese elites.
Well, on the on the far west coast, it, China is much more influential
The
than the
U.S.
subcontinent.
Okay, then yeah,
Whereas in other parts of the country, that relationship is reversed.
yeah. And so, where does that leave somebody in the middle, the elites in the middle, which is something that we kind of pointed to on our first discussion?
Well, so you've got this block of elites in the east of the Rockies, western part of Canada, that had built a framework for politics predicated on an alliance with Red America.
Mm-hmm.
And that plan
Maple Mega.
has, yeah, Maple Mega is like it's the 75 IQ version of the plan. But
Oh,
the idea,
75, that's kind of low.
well, I mean, the idea is basically that Canada has nothing to fear from the United States. The United States would never is never going to be a genuine threat to its its sovereignty, and so the two countries ought to be deeply integrated, right?
Hmm.
That entire narrative has exploded in their faces in Trump too, because of what is probably best described as the tariff shakedown of Canada.
Hmm.
And so you have a group of elites there who have they haven't found a new story to tell about
Okay.
how they're going to chart a future for their people, but they know they hate the federal government,
Yeah.
and
And they can't trust
so
their own
they're trying
elites.
to
Yeah.
they're trying to kind of figure out what to do now that the plan of being kind of on Red America's side in Canadian politics is no longer viable.
It's pretty toxic.
Yeah, it's not just toxic publicly. A lot of these people feel personally betrayed, and so
Hmm.
it's not
By Trump
by Trump,
and his admin. Okay.
and also by the class of people in Red America who find it necessary to defend whatever it is Trump does. Right. So these people thought were friends and business partners
Mm.
uh, were suddenly not friends and business partners in the way that they would have hoped.
Hmm.
And it's
Are we talking about the rhetoric about the 51st state kind of
the
stuff? Or
rhetoric about the 51st state is part of it,
yeah.
but I mean the basic story from Trump is Canada is ripping us off. They're treating us badly,
Okay.
right? And
Which is not true, semi-true, somewhat true
so
from your perspective.
from my perspective, it's complicated. Canada has a classic colonial economic relationship with the United States. Canada produces a huge excess of natural resources of various kinds, most of which are delivered to the United States. In return, Canada is a substantial net importer of manufactured goods of all kinds from the United States.
Mhm.
There's a
So we're talking
long
about lumber and oil,
Yeah, so if you look at
a few other
the
things.
bilateral trade relationship, uh, the United States imports lumber, oil, natural gas,
Okay.
iron. Um, Canada's a
Yep.
huge exporter of aluminum. All, a whole collection of, as well as agricultural goods that tend to
Yeah.
flow southbound, and then is a huge importer of every kind of manufactured good in the United States.
Yeah.
Canada has this weird failed project from the early 90s to become a low-cost manufacturing center for the United States.
Yeah, there's this television series that's fascinating. It's How Are Things Made? And I think
Yep.
most of it's set in Canada. And
Yeah,
you just
almost
see a
all of it.
lot of manufacturing going on.
Yeah, so in the between 1980 and about 1995, uh, the what later became the globalization of the American supply chain first moved to jurisdictions like Canada. The assumption made by people like Mulroney was that Canada would have a long-term future as a low-cost manufacturing center for the United States. Uh, what they didn't understand is that President Reagan's actual plan was to open the trade relationships not just with Canada, but with many other much lower cost jurisdictions. And
Mm.
so a lot of these efforts to move manufacturing to Canada from the United States for lower cost all kind of died on the vine. And so you have a period in the 90s where, like in the US, there's constant labor unrest. There's a lot of government bailouts to manufacturing industries to try to keep them alive. Ultimately, this fails, and Canada retains like a small footprint in auto manufacturing and steel manufacturing, but
And
fundamentally,
blackberries.
but fundamentally, this becomes an irrelevant part of Canada's economy
Okay.
by the mid 2000s. And to the extent that it is a relevant part, it's a almost entirely subsidized by the government part of the
Okay.
economy.
All right.
And if you look at the balance of trade and manufactured goods from between Canada and the United States, Canada's a huge importer of manufactured goods at this point.
Okay.
So if you there are a number of interpretations people take of the Trump tariff plan. One of them is to try to reindustrialize the United States for strategic reasons. That framework doesn't fit the tariff profile for Canada at all, because if you were trying to reindustrialize the United States, having a jurisdiction that you're a huge importer of natural resources to and a significant net exporter of manufactured goods to, that's the kind of trade relationship you would want, especially because the U.S. has excluding oil, the U.S. has a trade surplus with Canada, a significant one. So with that in mind, you have to look at the alternate explanations for the tariff behavior, and the one that I tend to put the most stock in is that this is fundamentally a revenue shakedown, right? Canada has a federal sales tax. The EU has VAT taxes everywhere, and the view I would take of it is that rather than impose like a sales or VAT tax, the idea is to impose a set of tariff barriers in order to get to a similar effect. 10 to 20% tariffs, like the 10 to 20% VATs and sales taxes.
How does that benefit
prevail in most
America? Sorry, this is kind of shaky ground economics for me.
I mean, so it benefits the United States in that it's a way of raising revenue while at the same time privileging domestic production.
Okay.
Right? So it's like a VAT tax, except all the domestic producers are exempt from it.
Okay. Yeah.
And I can understand that the U.S. government needs to shake down for revenue, and that's an issue. So from that point of view, there's some sense to it. And Canada is in a strategic position with respect to the United States where it probably can't effectively fight back in the short term. So it's a jurisdiction where shaking it down for revenue makes a certain amount of Machiavellian sense, at least in the short term. Yeah. So the view that prevails in Canada is that this is a shakedown, but B, it's a shakedown that's going to work for a while, because the ways to kind of manage around the shakedown are to partner Canada more closely economically, either with Europe or China. But the degree of infrastructure investment you would need in order to move Canada's natural resources instead of north-south, either across the Pacific Ocean or across the Atlantic Ocean, is enormous. So it's not something that it will never make economic sense, but it's basically completely impossible in the short term.
Unless China partners with Russia, but Russia has just as many, more resources, so it doesn't.
Well, and this is the other issue. Even if you take that plan, there's no one to say that you can execute it, and there's the defense issue where if Canada attempts to be a resource partner with China, I wouldn't imagine that the United States would tolerate that in the long term. So, as I say, there's no good plan here. Not only does the sort of formula for Canada's future from the Western Canadian elites not make sense, the formula from the Laurentian elites that says, okay, well, we need to gain leverage in our negotiations with the United States by, Carney is positing that we form a closer partnership with the EU. This is not really a credible plan because the physical infrastructure to deliver natural gas to the EU to deal with the shortages there just doesn't exist. It's not likely to exist at any time in the near future. And even if it did exist, the United States has a history of disrupting trade relationships that it sees as unacceptable.
Yeah.
So I don't think this is a credible plan. I don't
Such
think...
a sovereignty, man.
Yeah.
So from the inside, Canada is getting destabilized. There's no real uniting narrative. The elites are kind of having a tug of war going in different directions. This relationship to America is not stable anymore. Well, it's at least not beneficial to Canada. but Canada doesn't really have any recourse to partner with other superpowers, and it can't become a superpower itself at this time. Like, can it? Like, I
Well,
see. This is macroeconomics. I can't really
this
get
is
my
what
head
the
around it. But
Century Initiative is all about. So the Laurentian elite think that part of the solution to this paradox is to, you know, multiply the population of Canada by 4 or 5
yeah,
via mass migration.
yeah, but that's not Canada anymore.
Well, I can tell you that this plan is not going to work out. But and interestingly, increasingly, the Laurentian elite can also tell you that this plan is not going to work out.
Okay.
Um, and
Huh.
so, but there's no. I was watching a piece done by a friend, Simon Roberts, on hypernormalization, talking about the latter stages of the Soviet Union, and the argument. The term hypernormalization refers to the state where the state narrative for the plan for the future is understood to be ridiculous, but everybody keeps repeating it as a matter of kind of social consensus. But also, nobody, because of that social consensus, there's an inability to
Act. Recognize.
posit posit an
Yeah.
alternate future, right? Even
Yeah.
imagine
Yeah.
internally an alternate future. And
Wow.
Canada, watching this piece, I couldn't help but think of the current condition of Canada, where everybody knows almost at all levels of society that these plans are not going to work. Um, but we kind of agree to tell them to each other.
Hmm.
Um, and we have had we've been completely unable to form an alternate view of our own future. Um, I also think that if there was a clear victor in the red versus blue conflict in the U.S., it would be easier because then Canada could get on board with the priorities of the long-term victor in that factional struggle.
Mm.
But certainly to the Canadian elite, there's no the Trump administration shows no evidence of durability. And so there's no
Hmm.
incentive to get on to tightly partner with them, particularly.
Wow. Yeah. You're dealing with the bipolar sovereign.
Well, yeah, I mean, which side do you get on? Clearly, you can't get on both sides because their priorities for the relationship with Canada are diametrically opposed.
Mm.
And, the people who tried to get on board with Team Red were abused for their trouble. The people who have tried to get on with Team Blue, they haven't been especially treated well, and so it's very not obvious what to do. I There are a lot of things that are very obvious for how you might try to govern Canada better, but this area is just it. There's no solutions.
Yeah. Well, so at some point, if Canada on one level or another collapses, there's a bankruptcy or whatever a soft collapse would be, it would be even more vulnerable to outside influence. Where would that outside influence come from and for what? What would America offer Canada if Canada had to beg America for help?
Yeah, this is a hard question to answer. So, Canada is an enormously resource-rich country, which
Yes.
means it will always have international partners that are interested in investing in Canada, that are interested in a positive relationship with the country in order to get access to those resources. And in all those cases, that's an economic transaction, and it will be more exploitive the weaker Canada is
Yeah.
internally.
Yeah.
And so I think the most likely outcome is that we have a more exploitive relationship with the United States for a while. Well, a number of issues that are out there are resolved,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
It's very unclear what the global footprint of the United States will be 20 years from now, it's very unclear what the resolution to the red versus blue factional struggle will be. And while those items continue, and while Canada continues in this kind of state of hypernormal, soft collapse, I just expect Canadians to live at a lower standard of living as a consequence of this inability to bargain on their own behalf because of internal weaknesses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that lower standard of living could lead to unrest, but it could also lead to self-discipline and then unity, which then would give it the political will later on down the road to rally around a strong
Yeah,
nationalist.
it's hard to know exactly what the outcome will be because the inability of the central government to deliver high standards of living, um, that's a critical part of the governing formula for the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be that the result of this moment in Canadian history is that Canada just tears itself apart, and you end up with small successor nations
Hmm.
basically caught in the same exploitive relationship with the United States because if they're
Yeah.
not annexed, that's where they're going to be. So that's a possibility. What I think is the most likely possibility is that it just kind of carries on like this until there's a clear resolution to the issues in the reorganization of the American empire. But
Is
there's
is
no
Mark Carney the successor of Trudeau, the Liberal Prime Minister, current Liberal Prime Minister? Is he speaking to these concerns at all, or is he making moves that make sense in
well,
light of all this circumstance?
I think Mark Carney is a fascinating political figure on a number of levels. So Mark Carney is the kind of archetypal story of a Laurentian elite kind of made good. So he grew up in Canada, went to Harvard, and integrated into the transnational elite of the American empire. He was appointed by a conservative government to be the governor of the Bank of Canada. He then left Canada to be the governor of the Bank of England. And
Mm-hmm.
then when the opportunity was perfect, when the Laurentian elite wanted to do in Justin Trudeau, he had the red carpet rolled out for him to come in and be the replacement candidate. He then wrapped himself in the Canadian flag, you know, person who spent more than half of their life outside the country, wraps himself in Canadian nationalism, running for the Liberal Party of Canada, who recently declared Canada a post-national state with no
Yeah.
particular identity,
Yeah.
wins a narrow political victory on the back of kind of boomer white voters
Yeah.
who are
Or
wedded.
indoctrinated to.
Well, they're
Yeah.
wedded to left-wing Canadian nationalism and feel threatened by Trump and want the kind of strong hands of a figure like Carney that makes them feel comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
He now is the leader of a liberal party that is both ethnically and ideologically fractured and holds a minority in parliament. So
Mm-hmm.
he's profoundly weak in terms of his ability to pass law and his ability to control his own caucus. And he's doubly weak in that Canada has staggered out of the COVID self-imposed recession to very poor economic performance and is faced with this enormous challenge of trying to shepherd the country through this period. His plan for this is to try to middle ground, uh, is to try to kind of find a middle ground and get back to normal in the country somehow.
Yeah.
So you can see this on migration. Carney will very publicly signal to Canada's British identity, to its historic populations, Um, he has drawn down the number of temporary foreign visas. He's
Yeah.
allowed many to expire. Um, if things stay as they are, there will be a huge number of temporary foreign workers in the country who will no longer have a visa and who will therefore probably have to go home. There's a fight going on between Carney and the provincial government in Ontario over whether or not the provincial government will just issue these people work permits so that they can stay forever. So you can see he's
Yeah.
trying to pivot the federal government. He's trying to reduce migration without reducing it so much that we have a real estate collapse. He's trying to pivot towards the European Union, but do so without collapsing his coalition over environmental concerns for building pipelines. He's
Oh
got a
yeah.
lot of these deep contradictions that he's trying to bridge, and it's very difficult.
Yeah.
Um,
Why would he take the job if it unless he's some sort of switch and bait figure? You come in, you basically get crucified on the issues that we created, and then you go away. Or there's some sort of purpose that he has
oh, it's
that if
very
he could pull this
straightforward.
off.
So the Canadian elite is betting that in another year, 2 years, Donald Trump will be politically irrelevant. The tariffs will go away and he'll look like a hero. And he'll be a hero to the
Okay.
transnational kind of globalist faction of the American elite because he was the guy who stood up to Trump and, all
Huh.
this other crap.
Okay. All right. If he can pull it off.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know whether I tend to think that the problems in Canada will blow up before Trump disappears, but
Hmm.
I don't know. I mean, look, we'll see.
Yeah. Well, if you had carte blanche, and even if you had to dip into speculative fiction territory, how would you solve the situation? If you just had infinite power, or infinite reasonably absolute power.
Yeah, so if Canada was restructured as the Black Horse Reich, I've mused about this on my Twitter timeline a number of times. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, my view is broadly that Canada should self-impose economic suffering in order to get through this period and come out on the other side
Hmm.
with a nation that is healthier. And that should include allowing the tariff regime imposed by the United States to kind of put a little bit of economic distance between us and the United States, allowing the economic decline of Canada to continue quite aggressively in order to encourage a lot of the people who live here who are not Canadians to go home. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look, day one, I would close the temporary foreign workers program. Day one, I would put an end to permanent residency. So if you're not a Canadian and living here and have chosen not to become a citizen, you've got to go home. The If you imagine this world, the economic opportunities in Canada would look quite poor in the short term, which means a lot of the people who are citizens but who don't genuinely call Canada home would go back to their own countries.
Mm-hmm.
But also, you would have, instead of 40 million people to support on the resource revenues that come out of Canada, you'd have 25 million people to support on the resource revenues that come out of Canada, which would present a tremendous long-term opportunity to restructure Canada from a social point of view. The other thing that I
Hmm.
think is integral is to completely rework the Canadian education system, which has become a
You want to go
combination.
bury more babies in the ground, huh? Is that what you're going to be get up to?
Well, I mean, my view is that so the Canadian university system
Oh
apart
yeah.
from a narrow set of research institutions, basically needs to be burned to the waterline. But also, I think that there's no reason why um, a narrowed population has to have no social consensus with regard to how education is done.
Hmm.
So if you look back at Canada before 1980, by having a French Catholic school system and an English nominally public but fundamentally Protestant education system,
Hmm.
Canada was able to have very value laden education in the public system. So, up until the the period between 1980 and 1995, Canada had things like Lord's Day laws, so you can be open on Sunday. It had the Lord's Prayer in public schools. It had like incredibly Anglo-chauvinist curriculums where you fundamentally understood yourself as
Hmm.
the heirs of the thousand-year-old British Empire, both culturally and in terms of its politics.
Hmm.
There are some social issues that I think were already problems in Canada before that, but the public school system was a servant of a kind of Canadian identity that existed a long way back.
Yeah.
And I think if you self-impose the kind of economic pain that's coming anyway, and used it as an opportunity to reconsolidate the Canadian identity, you would have a tremendous opportunity to build something that is more durable so that 20 years from now, you could have a Canada that was in a much better position to recover economically. I also think you would have the opportunity to make Canada the first post-feminist state. Because if you remove that migrant population and you remove what I call the American Empire mercenaries, the people who belong to the a transnational collection of states rather than to a particular territory,
Hmm.
the Anglo-Canadian population is still as religious as Red America. Um, and so you have an opportunity there to craft a society that has like a sensible relationship with gender in a way that no Western society has had in quite a long time.
Hmm. Wow.
So I
Has
like
there
that's what I
has there
would
been a
do, but that's not going to
country?
happen.
I know. I'm like, I wanted to ask the question. I'm like, but I gave him carte blanche, so don't poke a hole because we all know that that's never going to happen. Has there? Can we think of a historical example of a population that allowed itself to undergo economic suffering for the long-term benefit?
Well, I mean, what you're looking at is an English Civil War kind of scenario, right?
Uh,
You're giving me the powers of Oliver Cromwell to
yeah.
cancel
Okay.
Christmas and
Yeah.
right?
Cancel Christmas.
That's what you're doing,
Oh
and
wow. Yeah.
it's the same kind of outcome. In that case, the ultimate result was you expelled the Puritan population to North America and reconsolidated the English identity
Yeah.
around the Royalist identity.
Yeah.
In this case, it would be the Cromwell side victorious, expels the Royalists and
Yeah.
founds the thousand-year Cromwell Reich. But
Yeah.
it's the
Yeah.
same fundamental concept.
Is it's really hard for us to imagine in this post World War II quote unquote rules based order for lines on maps to be redrawn. What's the likelihood of Canada turning into a Neapolitan country? Well, I mean, set of countries above America where you have the left coast, the east coast, and then the middle, and
I
as
think
three distinct.
it's much more likely that it gets there in a de facto way rather than a de jure
Okay.
way.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the likelihood of it getting there de jure is not zero, and the issue that drives that is migration, because the advantage of drawing the lines hard on the map is then you have the right to control your migration policy, which
Yeah.
is a huge priority for French Canadian nationalists.
Well, yeah, but there's two issues here. There's the keeping people out. There's also the keeping people in. And
Yeah.
if the economic situation is such that it is too dire, then everybody who can will flee and go to America, and America will probably just let them in with very
Yeah, I
little.
mean, a lot of the people who are here will go back to not America, their own countries, because the economic prospects in their own countries are much better than when they left.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, yeah, but I'm talking about the native. Well, the Anglo Canadians would just. Why would they stick in Canada? How do you make Canadian identity something that's more attractive than monetary economic upward mobility?
I mean, anybody who's old stock Canadian who was
Hmm.
willing to go to the United States for economic advantage has already done that,
Okay.
right? Most talented Canadians, myself included, have had job offers for like five, six times the money in the
Yeah.
US. That's
Yeah.
just the way it is. And that's been the way it is for 40, 50 years now.
Yeah.
Um, and it's not that hard to get a visa for the US.
Well,
So,
what keeps you from being the I can't remember your industry, but the financial Rick Moranis?
um, so I have 200 plus years of
Yeah.
family history, within
But you
20
love
or
it.
30.
It's not just that you have a plaque on your wall and your DNA 22andMe certificate. Like you are, it's more than just, I mean, it's blood and soil, but there's a quickness to that, a thickness to those bonds for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's the whole family network that's here.
Yeah.
So there's that, but it's like if you cut those bonds, you will never have them again, right? So if you imagine a world where I, took one of the
Mm.
jobs in the States that I was offered, my children, my grandchildren would never have an identity in the way that I have an identity. They would never be bonded to their place, their people, their religious tradition in the same way that I was given the opportunity. Um, it'd be an abandonment of everything that I value
Mm.
in exchange for money and what, quite frankly, is a very unattractive American identity.
Mm.
I appreciate that, Americans are Americans and they love what America is, but I don't love what America is in the same
Mm.
way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What that sounds like a mixture of just your character, but also how you were raised. What do you think it was about your own education and social early childhood development that gave you such a strong sense of attachment to your family, to your lineage?
Um, this is kind of a layered question. Um, so there's something deep in the Canadian spirit that is like Canada, Upper Canada is the product of loyalists. It's the product of the choice for loyalty to the crown above
Hmm.
kind of Republican individualism. Um, in that sense, there's a long, there's a kind of tradition of the view that the economically expedient thing is kind of dishonorable and dirty.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't know, like my grandparents were deeply involved in my life. They lived either across the road or in our home for most of my childhood. Um,
What was their generation like, or what were they like embedded in
my
their
yeah, my grandfather was
historical?
a senior officer in the Canadian military during the Second World War.
Yeah.
Um, and after that, he managed a paint factory in Canada, with the same kind of. He used to fire people if they didn't shave before work.
Oh, really?
Yes. So he had a kind of he's very much of the old kind of British aristocratic stock. He spoke four languages.
Oh, wow.
He had a university degree from the 1940s. So like all that entailed.
But
Uh,
he's upper working class then,
yeah, I mean,
but still aristocratic.
well, so he had sensibility. Remember that
Yeah.
Canada in the before times wasn't a merchant oligarchy the way the US was. It was a martial oligarchy. So your social position was a consequence of your relationship to the military, not a consequence of your economic position in the country.
Okay. Yeah.
And so um, he would have viewed himself as an aristocrat, even though from an economic point of view, he was, upper middle class at best.
Hmm.
But like, I have ancestors who fought in Strathcona's Horse in the South African War. This is like a very
Hmm.
um, deep-seated part of that character that was passed down.
Yeah.
Um,
The
I mean,
consequences of World War II are really profound, and we wrestle with them in a thousand ways, especially on the level of Anglo identity.
yeah, because the all the lines of power and status that used to maintain the Anglo-Canadian elite were all cut as a consequence of the collapse of the British Empire. So these people had delusional self-identities all through the period after the war.
Yeah,
So
loyalists to what?
exactly. And
Wow.
people like my grandfather had this delusional self sense of status from their association, from their service to the crown, but the crown was not an agent able to provide status anymore in the new world in which he lived. And so you have this period after the war where, um, I mean, Diefenbaker is the quintessential figure of this, where there's this deep resentment of the Americanization of the country, but there's no power or force behind it.
Hmm.
And so it kind of inevitably meets its doom. But the children of that tradition are still alive. They still sign up for the Canadian military, and they still, sing "God Save the King" um, at
Hmm.
RMC. So uh, it's a very strange
Hmm.
situation. It's a culture that has to change because there's no there's no restoration of the like when Diefenbaker tried to make the Commonwealth a force in the world that had teeth. It wasn't the other Commonwealth countries that rejected him or Canada that rejected him. It was the United Kingdom who was disinterested in it.
Hmm.
When Trump threatened to make Canada the 51st state, there was no strongly worded statement coming from King Charles about how Canada is a dear part of the Commonwealth.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's just nothing. It was our problem and not their problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Well,
that identity is
yeah.
very it can't continue, and yet um, here we are.
Yeah, well, but how did your parents reform that identity? How do you, with that identity handed to you, reform it to be more accurate? And
I mean, the big generational change is the relationship with the Canadian state. So my grandfather would have viewed the Canadian state as a vehicle for his power, right? As a part of the military, that's the arm of society that's supposed to use the state to
mhm.
rein in the excesses of the merchant oligarchy.
Yeah,
My father's generation said, no, no, no. What we do is we join the merchant oligarchy, and that's how we participate in the elite levels of society. And so, I got involved in the financial industry because of my father.
yeah,
At the level of my generation, uh, the relationship with the state is a fundamentally hostile one, where you view the state as an agent of the American empire,
Yeah.
and your identity as
Or
a
the
like a
globalists. Yeah.
yeah, as a folk identity in a sort of relationship as a parochial identity, in contrast to the kind of global monoculture that comes out of the cities.
Yeah.
And you set up things like parallel institutions. You think of yourself the way Afrikaners think of themselves. The problem is you have this connection to a history that doesn't elegantly fit into that identity. And so
Yeah.
you're in
It's
this
interrupted in
process
several ways.
you're in this process of weird ethnogenesis where in some ways English speaking Canadians are compelled to either become Americans or develop their own kind of identity that's independent of the British Empire.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And a big part of how this is happening is in the change in relationship to religion, where after the war, Canada, English Canada became secular in a similar way to the way Britain became secular, and the church became a kind of social institution. And that was true for the Boomer generation. For the parts of English-speaking Canada that still have a will to live and a will to continue our culture, it has become like a profoundly important folk institution because it provides shelter from the global progressive culture.
Yeah. Is there like one chief denomination, or is it fractured?
It's fractured a million different ways.
And are those fractures like troublesome or
Well, so
problematic or
those fractures mean that it can't emerge as there's
okay?
no elite class that
So they're
goes
not
with
just
it.
nominal. Those fractures actually affect the
Well, but on the
condensation
other
of power.
hand, the fractures are strategically valuable because it
Hmm.
means that when the Canadian government comes to kick around Canadian Christians, there's no target. There's
Yeah.
no so
Yeah.
like during
There's
COVID
no
when you
like yeah.
during COVID when you decide you want all the churches to close, there's nobody. You actually have to go and arrest like a million little pastors. Um, Otherwise, you can't enforce discipline because
Yeah.
there's no bishop to
Yeah.
direct all of his subordinates, right?
Yeah. Huh. Wow. Wow. Well, you know what? We set this conversation up about a week ago, and then it made me jokingly say on Twitter, like, "Remember Canada? Whatever happened to them, yo?" Because our like little imaginations on Twitter just kind of we were joking about Canada, and then we moved on to all these other issues, and I wanted to kind of get a better sense of it from you. And I know it's only a piece because you're viewing it from your point of view, even though it's very rich with your history and the direction that you're headed. But I'm wondering if there is any movement towards, like, are you and your cohort formulating connections? Are you guys involved? Are you involved with any emerging, like, uniting?
Yeah, so there's um, the wind is changing in Canada in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
and so there are Canadians on the sort of non-traditional right fundamentally have consolidated around the issue of ending mass migration and remigration,
Yeah.
right? That's the signifier that
Mm-hmm.
you're an ally as opposed to an enemy. And
And
fundament
what
and
kind of names do you guys get called?
Not much anymore.
Okay.
So because of what has happened over the last couple of years, the agenda to remake Canada as a kind of you know, the banner is the Century Initiative. The Century Initiative is this think tank that has a plan to make
Hmm.
Canada a nation of 100 million people by 2100. Um, Profoundly influential
And they
institution.
didn't
And
do that by closing abortion clinics. They did that by opening the floodgates to other nations.
that's correct. I know a number of members of the Century Initiative. Um, but like the basic political argument that they've made implicitly is that if we introduce a serf class of migrants, then boomers can continue to live like they're upper middle class despite the economic decline of the country.
Okay, well, as long as
Because
boomers have it easy.
so this is why there's such a profound generational divide.
Yeah,
But it's
yeah.
actually the upper middle class that's deeply committed to this. It's not the Canadian elite, and it's not,
Hmm.
and because it's not the Canadian elite, um, you might get called names in conversation, but the power of the state has kind of gone out from behind those people.
Hmm.
And we now live in this moment where actually the Canadian state is trying to pivot, and the kind of upper middle that felt very secure from 2020 to 2023 are suddenly kind of squirming in their seat a little bit.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, I don't have any delusions that this means that people like me are going to be in a position of political power anytime soon.
Hmm.
My basic view is that there's a long road for many subcommunities in Canada to start developing an elite that can genuinely advocate for their interests. And that road runs through things like establishing our own education
Yeah,
institutions. It runs through the road of having tighter communities. It runs through the road of doing things like this show to kind of
yeah.
grow our
Raising
community
awareness.
and have people kind of understand the situation they're in.
Yeah.
But this is not a something that's gonna. The Black Horse Reich is probably not going to be realized in my lifetime.
Well, do you think that the Quebecois will wise up and team with you Anglos, you
I don't
upstarts?
know. I don't know.
Is there inroads? Would you be willing to,
Well, so
eat
Canada
croissant to
be
get get some leverage?
began its life as an alliance between French Canada and Anglo Canada, and
Yeah,
if it has a future as a national project, its future runs through
yeah.
that alliance. Whether or not it's viable or not is
Hmm.
that's a whole other question. Uh, Quebec
Are there any
nationalism.
thinkers such as comparable to you in
Yeah, there's French
Quebec?
Canadian nationalism is it, it's well ahead of nationalist movements. I wrote a piece, part one of a piece, Quebec, the last Western ethno state, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
French Canada is still managed as an ethno state. French
Yeah.
Canadian nationalism is the official government position
Why didn't you
for the Quebec government, right?
call it the Israel of the North?
uh,
I mean, if you wanted clicks, man, come on.
yeah, I mean, Mr. Boyce, I am not a clickbait artist. I
Okay.
uh,
Well, the idea is yours if you ever want to venture in that direction. Huh. Well, where can people find you? When are they going to find when they get there?
They can find me. My Substack is the Red Ensign, and my Twitter is at the Black Horse 65. So you can find me in either of those two places. The Substack is a publication that's really dedicated towards Canada.
Yeah.
But at the request of some of my subscribers, I took a few moments over the summer to
Hmm.
venture into some other territory. I wrote what's my largest piece so far, called uh, the the called "It's Time for the Right to Grow Up,"
Hmm.
um, chronicling what I believe is the very immature relationship between right-wing populists and power. And the argument in the essays is quite simple. The right needs to be deserving of power in order to assert itself in the long term.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I went through, Bolsonaro and a whole collection of these
Mm.
figures. Controversially, I think that Trump is one of these figures that is fundamentally unserious about power,
Mm.
and is hyper indulgent in his method of operation. And I think it's going to end very badly for those who have followed him, just like it
Mm.
ended very badly for those who followed Bolsonaro and a number of other political figures.
Mm.
Jordan Peterson also is highlighted here for his particular behavior in Canada, putting aside his sort of intellectual work. I think as a political leader.
Hmm.
Um,
He left you guys, didn't he? I think he's down in Arizona now.
yeah, he's down in the States someplace.
He was not willing to clean that particular room.
Well, at a very basic level, Jordan Peterson encouraged people to participate in dissent against the Canadian government during COVID. And
Hmm.
then at the critical moment, um, he, so first of all, he characterized that um, political dissent as petition to power rather than a contest for sovereignty, right? His
Hmm.
view of the truck protest is that it is intended to communicate a message peacefully to the Canadian elite that their behavior is unacceptable, not to um, engage in a contest for sovereignty with the regime. And I guess
Hmm.
the predicate for that view was that if you behaved in that way, then the regime wouldn't retaliate in the same way. But the regime has retaliated against those who participated in the truck convoy as if they were engaged in a contest for sovereignty,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, that's
Um,
what debanking is. It's like you are no longer a part of this society.
well, not just debanking, but like it's 5 years later. Two of the Coots Four are still in prison, facing charges that are almost certainly not legitimate. Um, the Canadian government is just now getting around to sentencing the key organizers of the truck protest in Ottawa, who will face prison sentences that would be extreme for murderers in the country for, a bazillion counts of criminal mischief, basically.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so they've treated these people as if they were launching like a coup when when their leaders encourage them not to launch a coup, but to launch like a petition for redress of grievances.
Hmm.
But the thing that really bothers me about Peterson is his unwillingness to. So, by the things that he said during COVID, he made himself the leader of opposition to the Canadian government's behavior. Not only did he not stay here and share in the consequences of the set of decisions he made as leader, but after the moment, um, after the moment of the contest for sovereignty during the truck protest, there's no follow up. There's no, well, what now? It's okay. Well, I'm going to go back to talking to people about cleaning their room and masculinity, and I'm a big fan of cleaning your room and young men
Well,
behaving.
he directed his lectures to Muslims and to Christians. He did all a series of videos extolling or exhorting different denominations to behave in the way that he
Yeah, I mean,
thinks
I,
is correct. But
I putting aside his intellectual work has,
yeah,
some value, I guess, but uh, like you can't take leadership of a group of people and then abandon them the next day. That's not The right should never accept that in its leaders.
yeah,
Um, and
that's
the
the
right is
difference between a leader and a grifter.
exactly, the right is constantly accepting this in its leaders. And I just I find it incomprehensible that it's tolerated at this point,
Hmm.
right? The moment Donald Trump told the January 6 people to go home, and I like the moments after that in 2020, I would have sworn up and down that he was politically dead. Um, and yet he was, you know, because of his victimization by the Biden administration, he kind of bought credibility back. But he didn't choose to. He didn't choose any of that. He was kind of compelled into it.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
I find this relationship between um, leaders need to be bound, need to have deep spiritual bonds that cannot be broken with the class of people that they lead. So they share in the consequences of their actions, uh, and therefore are compelled to think seriously about what
Hmm.
they ask the people who follow them to do.
Hmm.
Um, and it's time to demand that of people who lead, demand that of people who lead on the right.
Yeah. Yeah. Or at least, I mean, you have to teach people that that's what they deserve. I don't think people think that of their leaders. I think they, like Curtis has said a lot about the right. Curtis Yarvin, sorry,
Yeah.
not that familiar with him. But the right is just addicted to sugar highs. You know, oh look, we're banning transgender surgeries for children. We get to go home now. But those little pyrrhic, pyrrhic victories, uh, people need to be taught that they deserve more than that. And I really appreciate your. This is the first criticism of Trump that I see somebody criticizing him not on the level of knee jerk distaste, but actually wanting something more from the role that Trump, by hook, crook, and fate, ended up
Well,
being
I
installed
actually
into.
deeply admire Red America in a certain way. They deserve, after the way they've conducted themselves in the last century, they deserve a high quality leadership class.
Hmm.
Um, and it would be good for, I think it would be good for, um, I think it'd be good for everyone in the American empire if they got it. Um, Trump is a lot better than some of the leaders that they've had before, but I just think the days in which the material excess of the post-war period allowed kind of unseriousness about politics to be acceptable are over. It's
Hmm.
time to it's time to play the game the way that our forefathers played the game.
Hmm. The black horse speaks.
So that uh, so I wrote the two pieces during the summer. One was it's time for the right to grow up. The other was a piece titled The Harvest is Past, talking
Hmm.
about the collapse of the base draft and the collapse of the pipeline that brought people to realistic views of politics in the
Hmm.
period between maybe 2014 and 2023.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so during that period, you had this tremendous pressure out of the institutions, right? Where people with just fundamentally honest views of reality were compelled to, were either prevented from entering the institutions because they were white and male, or
Hmm.
pushed out of the institutions very sort of with a great deal of spectacle involved, and all ended up on the outside looking in and sort of forced together um, as opponents of the regime. That's a moment. So if you look at that in terms of sort of elite theory, what you have there is the ejection of a potential counter elite. Um, it's forced cohesion to some degree.
Hmm.
And a lot of us looked at that moment and said, the regime is rejecting highly talented, motivated people It's pushing them together. It's creating common interests from them. This is
Mhm.
the stuff that circulations of elite and new regimes are made of. And uh, that process has been interrupted to a degree, or at least it feels like it's been interrupted to a degree in the time after 2023. The US is maybe a bit of a different thing because there are legitimate political positions available to people
Yeah.
with right-wing politics. But in places like Canada and Australia and the UK, the regime is still
Oh yeah.
freezing all of these people out.
Yeah.
But if you look at the people, the complex of leaders, all of these people exited the system between 2014 and 2022. There are no new high caliber people being added to those groups. The harvest is past, the summer is over, and we're not saved. There's no circulation of elites.
But the elites that are left are increasingly devolving, wouldn't you
Well,
say? Or
they're ruling with hard power instead of soft power, right?
okay.
If you look at
Yeah.
the UK as a really egregious example,
Yeah.
uh, it's just illegal to oppose them, and they're very willing to use state violence and long prison terms
Yeah.
to enforce that status quo. Whether that'll go on, how long that tyranny will go on, I don't know. But the question of whether or not the regime had the will to enforce its sovereignty, at the point of the gun, has been answered in the UK, and the answer is yes.
Hmm.
The question in Canada has been answered. The answer is yes, and if you want to oppose the regime, uh, you can do so from exile in Arizona or something. But
Yeah. 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 Wow.
and so there was this moment that I think a lot of people on the right saw in the period after 2020, where maybe we'll get organized, maybe we'll actually execute a circulation of elites, and maybe we can actually maybe some fundamental change is possible. The regime looks pretty weak. There's all these talented people collecting outside of it, but it wasn't enough.
Hmm.
And there's no prospect that in the immediate future it's going to be enough. And so we find ourselves in this moment where
Hmm.
the intellectual arguments have been made, people have chosen their sides, and I suspect that if the relationship with them, I suspect that these questions can't be resolved in the peripheral countries. Like the AFD cannot come to power in Germany as long as the status quo persists in the United States.
Hmm.
Ukraine can't be Ukraine. Ukraine is very symbolic of this in my mind, where it's like held in place. The Trump administration says that it wants to get out of there, get a peace deal done, and yet the Trump administration is the thing that holds the status quo, the meat grinder in place.
Hmm.
And so we kind of wait, knowing that uh, we kind of wait for greener days, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. That rules based order.
Yes, the rules-based order that turns out to be based on American power.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Nice. Nice. Excellent black pills. What's the cherry on top? Black horse.
well, I mean, I so what's the answer to this? Well, the answer to this is that the people who enforce the rules-based international order lack something that we have.
Hmm.
Those of us in this space have a transcendent view of history, a transcendent view of our place in the world, are willing to make sacrifices for a future
Hmm.
in a way that they're just not. They live in the tyranny of now.
Hmm.
All that exists is, the last 10 years of my boomer life or something. All that exists is now for them. But when I think about building an elite bonded deeply to Anglo Canada, bonded deeply to my people, I think about that project in 100-year terms,
Hmm.
because I don't see that there's any other. Well, because I think that it's my duty to view it that way, right? I have a duty to God and to my people to have this very long view of the
Yeah.
consequences of my actions. What will my decisions mean for my great grandchildren?
Hmm.
Which I think is like a structural advantage that we have over these people, and that structural advantage will bear fruit in the long term, but it may
Yeah.
involve a lot of suffering and a lot of difficulty in the intervening periods, right?
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
means sacrificing to send your kids to Christian school or homeschool or whatever. It means sacrificing to build communities out of nothing and be the leaders of those communities, even when there's no economic incentive to do so. Um, so I just I think there's a long road ahead. I think um, it's it's just an interesting, but it is a structural advantage that we have over liberal individualists, that we don't think of ourselves as in like an 80-year project for hedonic maximization.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. You guys have duty. You have duty and dignity on your side, but those are slow burning.
Well, look, Kat,
Embers.
you asked for a white pill. There's your white pill.
No, I love it. I love it. I think a lot of people independently are reaching for the same set of values.
Well, I
And
had a really interesting interaction. So there's a collection of people on Twitter who have decided in the last couple of days to talk about how it's time for the secular right to rule.
yeah.
The religious right, the throne and altar right, as BAP called it, lost the argument, and that's why they're not in power. They've been losing the argument for a long time. It's time for them to hand over the reins. And my answer to this is, I find the attempt to answer this question very generative. First, because it caused me to reflect on how the throne and altar right actually lost in what I call the long 19th century, from the French
Hmm.
Revolution to maybe 1918.
Yeah.
And in that entire history, I find winning the argument is a very, very minor component of how they won. They won by a long campaign of organized violence. And they won because the throne and altar right ultimately gave up
Hmm.
in the ashes of World War I, right?
Well, maybe it gave up. Maybe it was broken. Maybe its children were persuaded, indoctrinated, and just the throne and altar were just simply outmoded and then not talked about. It became
Yeah,
corny.
yeah. I mean, the men who should have led it were buried in Flanders Field. There's nothing.
Hmm.
There's no other way to kind of express it than that.
The best were sent to the killing fields of those two world wars.
But the other side of this argument is, okay, so what is the secular right, and what do they believe, and how do they plan to win? And the My best reflection on this is that the secular right is fundamentally representative of Asian civilization, right?
Hmm.
So they have a view of the world which is basically Confucian. They have a definition of human flourishing that would be familiar to the Song dynasty.
Hmm.
And they have a model for governance which is absolutist and absolutist without reference to a particular um, absolutist with reflection to kind of what I would call general revelation, uh,
Huh.
uh, good as revealed in nature. Um, the counter argument I would make is that the civilizations which pursued this model were always bound by uh, their relationship with lifespan, right? Um,
Hmm.
if you look at what made European civilization, what made its hierarchy work, and why it was able to conquer the world, it's these um, dreams for projects that, frankly, modern people would think of as ridiculous. Like Notre Dame Cathedral is very famous for taking 200 years to complete.
Yeah.
Um, but you can think of the colonization of the Americas in the same way. It's a completely nonsensical project,
Hmm.
except that like none of the people who embarked on it ever saw substantial fruits, ever won out of the deal. Um, they were looking for another country. They were looking for a city which had foundations, and they
Hmm.
welcomed that future that they believed was promised to them by God at a distance, never coming into its fruits, never coming into the rest of the promised land that they foresaw. But they only acted that way because they had a kind of view of reality that is completely outside the imagination of either our liberal progressive opponents or of the secular right. And it caused them to behave in ways that are completely outside of narrow self-interest, but in profoundly in the civilizational interest.
Wow. Hmm. Hmm. How does the throne and altar get the mojo back?
A long road.
Hmm.
I so as much as I think the secular right is unfit to rule in the long term, and will lose because of its inability to make people make sacrifices. Um, you can see
Well, they
this in
can
the
do reps. I mean, there's something that's kind of like a sacrifice.
yeah,
Clean
but
your room, do
they can't make
reps.
people have children. Like they can't make people die for their cause because
Hmm.
in order to die, you have to see die for a cause. You have to see beyond your life. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
and so I just don't think they have it in them, even in the short term. Um, whereas I think if you like, I often say this to people about Canada, where if you just imagine hypothetically closing the borders tomorrow morning, 150 years from now, Canada looks like a Christian theocracy because of the birth rate disparity between the various communities that live here, and not just a Christian theocracy with fundamentally the same ethnic makeup that it had in 1900.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't think people appreciate enough the 100 and 200 year consequences of the relative disparity in willingness to make sacrifices.
Hmm.
Um, I
Hmm.
mean, the progressives conquered the world, but they conquered the world with a trail of martyrs behind them,
Yeah.
who believed in this. I mean, in my opinion, completely delusional and insane vision, but it was a vision which motivated them beyond their lifetime in ways that modern people really struggle with.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I fundamentally don't think that any system which can't motivate people in that way is generationally stable.
Beautifully put. You're somewhat of a prophet.
I do my best.
Do you have a regular show that you do? I know you
We do the Red
guest.
Ensigns show
Yeah.
periodically.
Okay. You do
So
some work for Academic Agent. Great guy.
yeah, so he calls me my his Canadian correspondent. I
Yeah.
probably won't do anything on that note for a while because nothing is happening in Canadian politics that's of interest until
Mm.
probably until the Carney coalition breaks down. So I suspect the Carney government to be relatively short-lived. I think we'll um, see a breakdown in that coalition sometime in the next 2 years.
Mm.
And that'll be the next interesting moment to make political content for a wide audience for
Yeah.
Canada.
Yeah.
Either that or there will be a crisis moment in the relationship with the United States. Um,
You
but
never know.
like I have a narrow audience for my particular content. I like it that way.
Well, yeah.
Um,
I mean, it's kind
and
of like essentially narrow.
I have I have good friends like you and an academic agent, which will periodically expose to a wider audience when there's actually something to say.
Mm. Well, I really appreciate you sitting down with me, giving me a better grasp of the situation up there. But the situation up there is not confined to up there. It really traces some bigger themes and in my own inquiry, trying to understand where we are and where are the possible futures ahead of us. And
Well,
you're
I think
heavily
the
invested and you care about that. What?
well, I
Sorry?
think the really interesting so like you taking a picture of Canada, there are a very large number of people trying to kind of get their head around what will actually happen in the United States. But I think the jurisdictions that everybody's kind of sleeping on are these peripheral jurisdictions of the kind of American footprint that now actually that have gotten a big push from the Trump tariffs and now actually have the capacity to go in a new direction.
Mm.
So if you look at what's going on politically in Japan right now, I find that absolutely fascinating.
Hmm.
They, there's a potential future where in the next 10 or 15 years there are no American troops in Japan and Japan has gone in an authentically Japanese direction for the first time
Mm-hmm.
since the war. There's a similar opportunity that exists in Australia where you've got the opportunity to play China and the United States against each other. Unlike Japan, Australia has an elite which is kind of struggling with itself.
Mm-hmm.
So you can kind of contrast them as sort of different stories where the same political opportunity exists. And I
Yeah.
find all of these nations that the moment that they're in politically absolutely fascinating. And I find the total absence of international voices to talk about what's going on there disappointing. So
Mm. Yeah.
if I could ask something of my interview show host, I would love to see what people from those places actually think about the moment after. Like in some ways, the Trump tariffs can be thought of as an escalation in the level of exploitation of the American footprint,
Mm-hmm.
which means in places that have no option, like Canada, it just means more suffering. But
Yeah.
in places that are not tightly geopolitically bound to the United States, there's a political opportunity there, a crown in the gutter that I don't think will be taken up in every one of those places, but you're gonna see there's a profoundly significant historical moment that occurred in the 90s, maybe even early 2000s, when the soft the soft power American takeover of both Russia and China failed. For the first time, the American empire utterly failed in that kind of project in another nation, and in a nation where their commercial elite was kind of deeply interested.
Hmm.
I think it's a fascinating question to kind of watch what happens to see which if you imagine like those stupid Cold War games from when you were a kid and there's red and blue on the map and you try to flip all the stupid countries in Africa or Eastern Europe red to blue or blue to red depending on which side. There's a It will be very interesting to me what happens when the first couple of countries flip sides in that conflict,
Hmm.
and what the reaction will be, and what the consequences for those countries will be.
Yeah, there's possibility. There's rules-based orders within rules-based orders that are waiting to be hatched.
Yeah, it's a tremendously generative moment,
Yeah,
just not in
dynamic.
Canada.
Yeah, no, yeah, interesting. Yeah, yeah.
So,
Well, my good friend, my good Canadian brother, what's coming up for your work? There a new essay in the pike, or are you pipe, or are you
yeah,
kind of having a summer,
well,
going on an illicit hike in Nova Scotia or something?
yeah, I mean, I spent the summer in kind of the hinterland of Canada. I took my son backcountry camping. I took the whole family kind of out into the woods a little bit. Um, and it's time to get back to work now.
Yeah.
I've got the Red Ensign show that's gonna talk about Canadian politics all year, talk about
Okay.
Canadian history and culture. And I have one more essay that I'm trying to kind of formulate
Hmm.
that's going to talk about the there's in addition to the exchanges about around the secular right that I've seen, there's also the anti-pronatalist right that's out there, um, that takes the position broadly that, um, if you think about Carlyle's arguments about heroes and hero worship, that the typological ideals for the right are men who have accomplishments that are, um, either intellectual or in the world. They're not that,
Hmm.
the glorification of uh, of family is in some ways a kind of feminization of masculinity. I
Hmm.
profoundly disagree with this.
Yeah.
My view. So first of all, I don't think that I actually think that that view from Carlyle is part of the kind of twilight of the British Empire. And if you contrast it
Hmm.
to the sort of Cincinnatus ideal from Rome, you'll see that actually the classical tradition has some different ideas about the duties of great men.
Hmm.
But also, I think that, uh, typologically elevating the great man over what you might call the good man, is a mistake. It's a kind of behavior that belongs to a different stage of the civilizational cycle.
Hmm.
When there's profound entrenched pro-social behaviors in the population, then the population can be picked up by a great man and something tremendous done with it. But in an environment like this, where, you know, people are self-castrating just to find some meaning in their life, they're elevating great men as the archetypal, um, as the kind of, teleological, focus for young men, um, is just going to produce a lot of failures instead of, um, elevating goals that
Yeah.
are pro-social and within the grasp of that are within the grasp of the men that will live in this age.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of a teenager's wet dream.
Yeah, I mean, you can't have Hernan Cortez without first winning the Reconquista, right? Uh, I don't know if Hernan Cortez had children, but fundamentally his life is a life which is kind of burnt out without passing generationally in his own right. Um, Whereas if you look at what was necessary to complete the Reconquista, it's this like deep line of pro-social behaviors and sacrifices and sacrifices and sacrifices for generation upon generation in order to outcompete an alternate
Mm.
civilization. And I think in the moment we're in, it's actually not um, the great man to go out and do something spectacular that is required. It's this
Mm.
it's a lot of people to make a lot of sacrifices
Yeah.
to just, move the bar a few inches forward, so that one day there's enough power there for someone to pick up and do
Yeah.
something useful with.
It's a beautiful analogy contrasting the Spanish conquering of the New World as opposed to the Spanish conquering of Spain from and retaking it from the Muslims. Two different types of men and timelines, I guess, were involved.
Well, I don't know exactly how long the Reconquista took, but it was more like 200 years, 250 years,
Uh,
something like that.
lasted from roughly 722 to 1492.
Yeah, 700 years. So even longer. Um, I mean, I always talk about the road from the fall of the Roman Empire to the crowning of Charlemagne as the passage from the death of a civilization to the new birth of a civilization.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and if you look at what was required of the men who eventually participated in the birth of Western Christendom, there's um, this very, very difficult period that just you had to get through. And um, you will not find great men in the history of France and Germany and England in the period between the collapse of the Western Roman Empire and the crowning of Charlemagne. You'll find them aplenty in the period after the crowning of Charlemagne through to like the 19th century. But there's this necessary set of preconditions a foundation that has to be laid to make it
Mm.
possible to act as a civilization again.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. I have to take my family on a little river trip. Uh,
Where are you going?
we're going across the state line into Idaho.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah, there's a river and some friends of the family. We're gonna meet
Yeah.
there and have a river date. Um, so I'm gonna go get some sun, and it shouldn't be too blistery out there. I mean, in the hot direction, not in the cold direction. But I underscore my enjoyment of your knowledge and your dedication to these ideas, and you also you're gifted with a poetic turn of phrase and the historical knowledge to back it up. So it's just a pleasure and an honor to have you on. I'll link to your work down there in the description. Do you have a book that has been particularly inspiring, insightful that you've picked up recently?
Uh, I think, uh, I think a very useful exercise for my non-Canadian audience be to go and read Lament for a Nation by George Grant.
Hmm.
George Grant is a Canadian philosopher and historian um, who spoke about uh, the Diefenbaker moment in Canadian history, the moment after the Second World War, but before the reinvention of Canada as a kind of American colony in the
Mm-hmm.
50s. Um, and the the thesis of Lament for a Nation is that there's an opportunity that the Diefenbaker government has to produce an authentic nationalist Canada, um, that is genuinely independent, but that this project failed because there was no elite class in the country at the time interested in the project. There's a populace that's interested in the project. There's a charismatic leader that's interested in the project, and every layer in between has
Hmm.
interests diametrically opposed to the project.
Hmm.
And I think it's deeply instructive to dissidents, particularly to populist dissidents in this moment, to kind of understand what it means. What are the consequences of engaging in populism without a leadership class dedicated to the goal that you're trying to forward via populism? And B, what it means to have aligned or misaligned interests for the elite classes that might make a project like that enduring.
Hmm.
It's a fascinating moment in Canadian history. I have my views about Grant's thesis. I've talked about them a bit on podcasts, but I think as Europe and the United States kind of um, struggle through this moment in history, I think people would understand what's happening to them a lot better if they
Hmm.
kind of had a look at what happened before.
Hmm. Hmm. Never hurts to look back.
So
Black Horse. Thanks for coming on again. I'll have you back in a less than a couple seasons, maybe in a few months.
thank you for having me back. I really enjoyed this. People really enjoyed my last appearance, um, or at least people that I know really enjoyed it. So
Yeah,
uh, hopefully your audience gets something out of it.
I know they will. I know they will. And we'll sign off there. Thank you, sir.